So very excited to have Kshama Swamy. Very excited. VP of Customer Engineering at CircleCI. So would love to hear about your journey. You've done managed massive teams, led customer-centric organizations. Tell us about your journey that's gotten you here.
So I think I'd start off with, I came to the US, did a master's, pretty traditional route there. It was very non-traditional before that, but we won't get into that right now. But after my master's, my first job out was actually at Department of Defense. So I was a consultant there. And I'd say 6 months in, I moved to management, and I was managing a team of basically, it was more on the consulting side, so services and support team for about 5 years. And at that point, I felt I kind of got into management a little too early. So sometimes in your career, I believe you take a step back to take 2 steps forward. So I actually went back into consulting. I joined the parent company that I consulted on, which is Cognos. So joined Cognos, was a consultant. It was the most phenomenal experience. 1 week you're in one city, another week you're in somewhere else. You just like understand multitude of different verticals. You just, one day you're in a fintech company, one day in legal tech. It's like it's very energizing and an extremely good learning experience. So did that for a couple of years, and then we were acquired by IBM. So was part of that acquisition. And as they say, life happens. You have kids. You can't really pack your bags every Monday and come back on a Thursday. So had to make some pivots there and started managing a support organization within IBM. So I'd say that was kind of my entry into the customer success space. It was perpetual license at that point, and you really didn't think about renewal, but support was a recurring revenue kind of a line item, right, at that point. So I'd say that's where my introduction to CS was. And then I did that for a few years, and you lived in the Bay Area. It just made so much sense to kind of join a tech company here versus being at IBM. So that was my pivot into a company called Intapp. Intapp is in the legal tech space. I think I heard somebody said legal here, some software that they're building. So I was there for about 7 years. I saw the growth from, I'd say my team itself grew from 3 to 200, and eventually we IPO'd as well. So it was a phenomenal experience. And then legal tech was interesting, but I was like, I've never done restaurant tech. So that was my next company. So I joined a small company called Punchh out of the Bay Area. And we were in customer loyalty business. So if you've ever been to like a Taco Bell and you've gotten your points, that's all kind of powered by us. So I joined Punchh, and Punchh was eventually acquired by another company called PAR. Again, COVID was kind of like a accelerator for a lot of restaurant tech at that point, because you had to do like 10 years of digital transformation in a year or in a few months. So that was kind of a very interesting phase. Then I joined PAR, and I think I was kind of I was there for about, again, 4 years, and I was sort of done with being in vertical space. So I moved to this company called CircleCI, and we're in the CI/CD space, working with very different personas, engineering personas. So it's been kind of a very interesting and a really good journey. So that's a little bit about it.
It's fantastic. What a unique journey. And you've actually picked these verticalized offerings, which is the way the industry is going today. Because I think deep tech has become pretty commoditized with the public cloud vendors and foundation models. So I personally invest in a lot of like restaurant tech, right? And all of these, legal tech too, have done some investments. So tell us more about what you're seeing. But you've switched now to CI/CD pipeline, like hardcore dev tools.
Hardcore dev.
Interesting. Well, so what gives you that flexibility to be able to switch between these industry verticals versus hardcore CI/CD? Because in each of those, you're pretty engineering centric,
Yeah.
right? You're doing customers. Is it customer support or
Customer support, success, services, like everything post.
everything? So you can't be, blind to the product and the user base. So what gives you that leverage to be able to switch so effortlessly?
I think curiosity is one, and I think next is I get bored very quickly. So I think I need to learn something new. I don't like being stagnated. And vertical softwares were amazing, legal tech was amazing, and you spend so much time learning about a field, and then you kind of start, this itch comes in where you're like, okay, I want to figure out something else. So I think it's more me than anything else. Okay. And I can't really say each of them were a strategic pivot that I did in my career.
Then how do you manage the learning curve as you go higher in the hierarchy, which is where you are now as an executive leader in your circle? You don't get a lot of leeway when it comes to asking questions, like naive questions. How do you manage the learning curve when you take on a new role?
I think the first few days you kind of treat yourself more as a support engineer. That's kind of how I've learned. Support is a good place to learn. That's where you start seeing issues. So I any new role that I've taken on, that's the mindset that I go with. I do want to try and figure out not only how the product works, what are the issues that the teams are seeing. So that's kind of how I guess figured out how to
Get your hands dirty
you
and
have
do your work.
yeah, because you can't talk to something, or you can't you can't talk to your customers about ROI without you really understanding what.
And then what about onboarding your team as they come on board? How do you, minimize the friction? And it's a difficult function. Customer support is sometimes the least valued in an engineering organization. Without it, we can't run.
Yeah.
But then we blame them because the customer's unhappy. It's kind of like a neat trick to play, right?
Yeah, I think there are obviously, different flavors of customer experience, right? There's support, there's success, there's services. I think when I'm hiring, I'm really looking for a few things. I did mention curiosity for myself. That is what I look for on my team. Grit is important. Like when you put in front of customers, it's very important you don't take things personal. And you've got to be gritty because you are really looking at the site of how you're solving something for your customer versus it's a problem. Like you really need to, it's the mindset that I sort of look for in people. And I think that's
The
important.
curiosity and learning mindset.
Yeah.
What else can you say about how you structure your organization? How does it fit into the rest of the organization? How are you adopting AI?
So I think I'll touch a little bit on customer centricity here. How I want to structure the organization should be in line with how the rest of the organization is structured. So I've seen a few places where this has worked really well, and a few where I think there could be much that could be better. But I believe that customer centricity in any sort of organization pretty much starts with the language that you used internally, right? You think of a customer as a problem or as an opportunity. And these are, in fact, when you join any company, you just really see this within you need the Slack, etc., and how they're communicating with each other and how they think about the customer. So I'd say you want to be in a places or you want to coach your team and the functional teams, especially product engineering, to actually look at customer issues, escalations, anything as an opportunity. It's always is versus, oh my God, we've got to deal with this. This customer has a problem, etc. Right? And the second thing is really across the board, whether it's support, services, success, product, marketing. I think we all have to align to some common goals. Having like that shared goals, shared responsibilities are very important. Sorry, shared accountability, not necessarily responsibility. Those are important, and those really come from sort of taking a step back and saying, what is it that we're all trying to achieve as an organization? It's definitely revenue, right? So and then that's where you sort of sit down and say, okay, let's separate out the leading and the lagging indicators for each team. Oh my God, thank you. So you want to make sure that all of you are tracking towards the same lagging indicator, which is revenue, but each one of you are looking at different leading indicators. Like a support team looks at something like the time MTR, the mean time to resolution for a support case, whereas a customer success team would be looking at the time to the first unlocking of the value. So it really depends, and as long as you kind of align from top to bottom, I think it kind of helps you work really well.
And then what about using AI? I think AI can automate a lot of, I guess, most of the work done by not just customer support, but most of the organization that's very kind of like looking up a manual and responding, or finding patterns in, customer support issues and then making recommendations on how to fix it, perhaps in the product roadmap.
Yeah, no,
So, well, how are you doing that in your organization?
so I'd say we're using AI pretty much in every function. And I think that is important. I'll take a step back and say CircleCI, we're not a seat-based model, which a lot of SaaS companies are. We're more on the consumption-based. So the minute you go from a software that has features to a software that's giving you an outcome, it's a whole different way to think about it.
That's right.
And when you're thinking about it in terms of outcome, there's so much more AI that you can build into, how you work with your teams, right? So starting with support, definitely there are chatbots. Um, for simple, like, on the website, there are questions, those all can be answered. So anything that I'd say has, mentioned the word pattern. So that's very true. Anything that has a set pattern, it's very easy for us to, get AI in. And even in customer success, you're looking at usage patterns, you're looking at consumption patterns, and you're sending triggers. You'll be using a digital CS motion to ensure that customers are kind of hearing, hey, we're seeing a spike in, say, this pipeline, or this pipeline is increasing its consumption. Is there anything that you want to work on it, right? So you kind of give them a CTA, you send out a communication, and then you kind of try and figure out what to do with this. All these things can be done with AI, similarly with support and with services. But there are these higher level conversations, the complex decisions, the executive relationships. Whatever you say, customer success, it's still a human to human relationship. So that still needs to be the human touch. Human touch aided with a lot of AI, like intelligence is coming from AI, but the touch and the end of the day, it's still a human. That's
So, how are you? There's just like a flood of tools
yeah.
in the market, right? Trying to help you do your job. How do you evaluate them and how do you pick and choose?
We're actually right now in the process of evaluating a tool to replace a legacy support tool. And you kind of want to start off with not where you want to be today, kind of where you want to be tomorrow, like a multiple step. And also with everything evolving, I just asked the team to put together like more of a wish list. These are the things, it may or may not be there in software today, but you also want to pick a vendor who you know is going to innovate with you. So that's kind of how we went about our process of evaluating and trying to figure out who that
But
vendor
isn't
is
it
going
the
to be.
case that some of these new tools coming out of, freshly born yesterday could solve your problems for you and you can't even put out an RFP? Do you even go there or do you just wait for them to get mature enough for you to evaluate them?
There's actually a debate happening right now around that, because I think the best fit is potentially a company that has 10 people and understanding the risk. And it's important to make sure that you understand the risk before you
So,
jump.
what would you recommend? I have like 67, maybe 70 founders between my portfolio and my accelerator, right? What is the best way in which they can approach an organization with someone like you saying, I'll give you a chance?
I think the product speaks for itself in a lot of ways. And if also I first coming in and understanding the pain is important. What is it that I'm trying to solve? Why am I even looking for it's kind of 101 of trying to understand the pain, and before you provide a solution, don't ever jump to a demo with me. That just doesn't work. First, make sure you're understanding all my pain points before you come back and solution for me. So don't jump to solutioning, is I would say is an
So, come and listen to your pain first so that it can be a better suited fit. Wow, interesting. Well, what else can you tell us about where you are going in your journey? So, you told us how you got here, but where are you going, especially with everything that's happening, the transformations that are happening, and also observing how women and men tend to gravitate towards each other? Did you see the pattern sitting on stage?
I was sitting on the other side. So
This is so funny. You guys just look at yourselves. Raise your hand if you're a man. Just see that. Okay, now raise your hand if you're a woman. Look at that. And then we blame the men saying they left us out. Anyway, so please edit that out. I don't want it to be part of the video, but how are you dealing with that in your own organization as you grow up the hierarchy? There aren't women in many rooms if you go to as leaders. And then who do you gravitate towards to sit and drink coffee with and lunch with and, talk to? And that's what isolates you at a very human level, I think, as you go up, right? There aren't enough women in these echelons. How are you managing that and how are you planning to go beyond? Like, I want to see you as like this public star, right? Like internally.
I think you have to be intentional, when you're meeting, because I go out and meet customers all the time, and I can't dictate that I'm going to only meet,
Right.
right? So, and again, it's just, I think you should forget about who you are. Like, to me, a customer is a customer. It's not whether they're a man or a woman, and they should respect me because I'm the one working with them to get them the outcomes that they want to achieve. So it's simple as that. So I don't think.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think we're at this point in history where we can confidently move thinking we have high value and it doesn't matter what your gender is. So, what do you see in this moment of time that brings an incredible rate of change?
So at a company level, because we're in the CI/CD space, what I'm really seeing is so much more experimentation that's happening with AI, so much more code that's getting generated, which you can say is good for us. But me, as being in CS, as I'm saying, no, that's caution. Let's figure out. But you're not seeing that much go into the production. Not all code is getting into production. That is a concern. That means the customer, are they really getting outcomes or are they just experimenting? So I feel it's
With your product, you're saying they're experimenting and if the code is not going into production?
no, I think we just put out a state of software delivery report, and that clearly showed that we had 59% increase in code generation, but only 4% of that is actually into production. So that is a phenomenon that's interesting. And I actually was fortunate enough to be in Davos last year. And one of the things that every leader spoke about there was how that the age of experimentation is ending in AI and ROI is going. Everybody's going to start
So,
talking.
to answer the question on the speed, you're basically saying it's just an illusion.
It's an illusion right now. I feel uh, it's like, Google Nano Banana, everybody started creating images. You're just using compute power. What's the outcome that's coming out of that? What are you achieving with that? You're learning. Amazing. Yes. But I think at some point, CIO, sir, you will ask, where's this budget going? Yeah.
But don't you think this thing is like perfectly spitting out perfect code? And then when it runs into errors, you feed it back and it tells you what the problem is faster than I could, right? As a human being.
Good, but also I think there's enough skepticism. I don't know if you're seeing that, whether it's actually ending up in production.
That perhaps it's the stage of company that gets influenced by this innovation. Because if you see, I think YC put out a report that I think about 80% of code that was generated for these companies in the last batch was fully AI generated. Which is the reason why they're able to get to $1 million in revenues in like 3 months.
Yeah, but
Like who does that?
I feel like there's a separation between code generation and code that's going to production. And
Sure. So you're looking at the code generation versus going into production, and I'm looking at the business saying, inception time versus revenue generation so that I can value the company, right? So I can't get stuck in the nitty-gritty of when was the code generated, was it going into production, but more when was the company incorporated? When did you hit your first, milestone of getting your first customer in production, perhaps? But when did you hit $1 million in revenues? When you hit $1 million in revenues, you're all like writing checks, right? And I'm seeing that window is narrowing. And the number of people required to do that is narrowing.
the number of people for sure is
Right?
that across the board, and even within our CX organizations, within support, everything, like, as much as we're increasing our customer base and our revenue, we're not really adding as many people. We are adding more tools, but we are also being cognizant to make sure that the tool is not more expensive than the person we're adding, which is important too.
That's true.
To think about.
And are you thinking about how do you evaluate the people to know? Well, we're always evaluating people to know if we should keep them on our staff, but have those parameters changed when you do those evaluations to see are they able to innovate more or adapt more to the new technologies versus not? How can people upskill themselves to keep their jobs? I guess that's the question.
I'll just give you an example. Like, everybody knows Cloud Cowork came out and it just changed everything that you did in a lot of ways. And we are a huge Anthropic shop. So one of the things that I'm doing with the team is we don't set annual goals. It's all quarterly now. So every quarter we're evolving with different skills. And it's less about have you done a training in Cloud Code versus can you actually implement the skill in Cowork, and can you implement that and make sure it's shared and it helps the rest of the team. So that's kind of how we're looking and evaluating.
Interesting. So you're not just saying, have you been through a training?
No.
You're saying, how hands-on were you and had you actually brought some ROI with whatever you did as your training? At the organizational level, is there a lot of experimentation and pivoting happening? Because yours, yes, it's a pretty large.
We are doing a lot of experimentation, but I think we're at the point where we're now starting to figure out what's the outcome we're achieving with that experimentation. And I'm doing that with my team as well. We did go out, try different tools, even within CS and support, but we also made sure that every time we experimented, we had measures on, which of them are really going to land and which we didn't feel is going.
Which you didn't feel is going anywhere. Yeah. Awesome. So big round of applause for Kshama. Thank you so much for sparing time in your very busy schedule.
Thank
And I
you.
think a lot of them would love to talk to you. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.